The chains around my wrists were silver, burning through the thin fabric they'd wrapped around my skin to keep me standing long enough to perform. I could smell him before I saw him. Cináed, the alpha who had rejected me 3 years ago, stood at the altar in golden ceremonial robes, waiting for his bride, and I was being dragged up the marble steps to sing at his wedding. Before we go any further, if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is built on your support, and I promise you won't want to miss what happens next. Also, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. You're not alone in this journey. My name is Órla. I'm nobody. An omega from the lower districts of Team Hair. Born without a pack, without status, without the golden eyes that mark the favored children of the moon. My eyes are grey like storm clouds over the Irish Sea, and that alone was enough to make me unwanted. But I had one gift, one curse depending on how you looked at it. My voice. They discovered it when I was 7 years old, singing to myself in an abandoned chapel. The acoustics carried my melody through the stone corridors, and a passing merchant heard it. Within a week, I was pulled from the orphanage and placed in the Royal Conservatory, not as a student with rights, but as property, a voice to be used. They trained me, beat the imperfections out of my technique, taught me to sing in 6 languages, and reminded me daily that I existed only to serve. I never complained. Music was the only thing that made me feel alive, the only time the world made sense. When I sang, I wasn't an unwanted omega. I was something more, something that mattered. Then I met Cináed. He was 21, newly crowned as the alpha heir to the high kingdom of Órla after his father's death in battle. I was 18, performing at a state funeral, my voice echoing the grief of a nation. After the ceremony, he approached me in the gardens. I remember the shock of it, an alpha prince speaking directly to a conservatory servant. He told me my voice had moved him to tears, that in all his grief, my song had been the only thing that gave him comfort. We began meeting in secret. It started innocently. He would request private performances and we would talk afterward. He asked about my life, my dreams, things no one had ever cared about before. I fell in love with him slowly, then all at once. And I thought, foolishly, that he felt the same. On my 19th birthday, he kissed me in the moonlight garden behind the conservatory. I felt the bond snap into place between us, that sacred connection that marks true mates. My soul recognized his. I could feel his heartbeat as if it were my own. I whispered, "We're mates," with tears streaming down my face, thinking this was the beginning of my fairy tale. He stepped back, horror twisting his beautiful features. "No," he said. "That's impossible. You're mistaken." But we both knew I wasn't. The bond doesn't lie. The moon doesn't make mistakes. Yet he looked at me with something worse than hatred. "Pity. Órla," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "the way you speak to a child who doesn't understand. I'm the alpha heir. I'm to marry Saoirse of the Northern Territories to unite the kingdoms. It's been arranged since we were children. You're sweet and your voice is extraordinary, but you're an omega with no pack, no lineage, no name. This," he gestured between us, "whatever you think you felt, it cannot be." I felt the rejection like a physical blow. When an alpha denies a mate bond, it severs something fundamental in the omega's soul. Pain radiated through my chest, stealing my breath. I collapsed to my knees in the garden, and he didn't even help me up. He just walked away, leaving me there in the dirt, and I didn't see him again for 3 years. Until today. His wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on me. The bride he'd chosen over me, Saoirse of Clan O'Neill, had requested me specifically to perform the ceremonial wedding song. Perhaps she'd heard rumors of what had passed between Cináed and me and wanted to humiliate me further. Perhaps she simply wanted the best voice in the kingdom for her special day. Either way, I had no choice. When royalty commands, servants obey. The guards dragged me up the aisle, and I kept my eyes down, refusing to look at the assembled nobility who whispered behind their hands. I knew what they saw. A thin omega in a plain white dress, wrists bound, being forced to perform like a trained animal. The silver chains burned, but I'd learned to endure pain. They positioned me at the base of the altar, just below where Cináed stood. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't look up. Not yet. The high priestess, Brigid, an ancient alpha female with silver hair and knowing eyes, gave me a nod. It was time. I opened my mouth and began to sing. The song was an old one, passed down through generations, sung in the ancient tongue of our people. It spoke of eternal love, of bonds that transcend death, of souls finding each other across lifetimes. My voice filled the cathedral, pure and clear, and I poured every ounce of my broken heart into it. If this was to be my final humiliation, I would make it beautiful. I sang of love I'd never have, of a bond that had been rejected, of dreams that died in moonlit gardens. The nobility dabbed at their eyes, moved by the emotion they didn't understand. They thought I was simply a skilled performer. They didn't know I was singing my own eulogy. As the final verse approached, I finally looked up. Cináed was staring at me, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. His golden eyes, the mark of royal blood, were wide with something I couldn't identify. Shock, recognition, regret. Behind him, Saoirse stood in her elaborate wedding gown, beautiful and cold as winter, watching me with barely concealed contempt. I held Cináed's gaze as I sang the final lines, the part where the lovers are reunited in death, their souls finally free to be together. My voice cracked on the last note, not from lack of skill but from the weight of genuine grief, and then silence fell over the cathedral like a blanket. The high priestess stepped forward to begin the binding ceremony, but before she could speak, Cináed moved. He stumbled down the altar steps, his legs seeming to give out beneath him, and fell to his knees directly in front of me. The entire cathedral gasped. An alpha, especially one of royal blood, does not kneel. Ever. Not to anyone. Not for any reason. It goes against every instinct, every law of our society. Yet there he was, on his knees before a chained Omega. His head bowed, his shoulders shaking. "I can't do this," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I can't marry her. Can't pretend anymore. Órla, please. Please forgive me." I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Behind him, Saoirse shrieked in outrage. The assembled nobility erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in shock and scandal. The guards moved toward us, unsure whether to intervene. Cináed reached up with trembling hands and grasped the silver chains around my wrists. I flinched, expecting him to pull me away, to drag me out for punishment, but instead he began trying to break them. Silver burns alphas too, but not as badly as it burns omegas. His hands blistered as he wrenched at the chains, and I could smell his flesh burning. "Stop," I whispered, finding my voice. "You're hurting yourself." "I don't care," he said fiercely, his eyes meeting mine. "I should have done this 3 years ago. I should have chosen you. I chose power and duty over my own mate, and I've been dying inside ever since. Every day without you has been agony. I thought I could ignore the bond, bury it under responsibility and expectation, but hearing you sing just now, feeling what you've been carrying all this time. Can't. I won't. Not anymore." The high priestess descended from the altar, her ancient face unreadable. "Prince Cináed," she said, her voice carrying authority that even royalty couldn't ignore. "What you propose is unprecedented. You would cast aside a political alliance, disgrace a bride at the altar, and claim a bondmate of no status? Do you understand the consequences?" Cináed finally broke through one of the silver chains. It clattered to the marble floor, and he immediately started on the second. "I understand that I rejected my true mate 3 years ago and have been living in darkness ever since. I understand that I prioritized politics over the will of the moon goddess herself. I understand that I've been a coward." He looked up at the priestess, his face streaked with tears. "I also understand that if I go through with this wedding, if I ignore the bond one more day, I will be a hollow king ruling over a kingdom I can barely see through the emptiness inside me." The second chain broke. My wrists were free, the skin beneath angry and red, but healing already now that the silver was gone. Cináed stood slowly, and for the first time in 3 years, we stood face to face without barriers between us. I could feel the bond singing between us, that connection I'd tried so hard to sever, pulsing with new life. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why not 3 years ago when it would have mattered? Why wait until your wedding day to grow a conscience?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Because I was a fool. Because I believed what everyone told me, that duty came before everything, that a king's personal desires were irrelevant, that I could force myself to love someone else if I just tried hard enough. I was wrong about all of it. Órla, I have spent 3 years trying to kill what I feel for you, and it has only grown stronger. I dream of you every night. I hear your voice in every song. I see your face in every crowd. I am haunted by you, and I don't want to be free of it anymore." Behind him, Saoirse had descended from the altar, her face twisted with rage. "You would humiliate me like this? In front of the entire kingdom? For a worthless omega from the slums?" She turned to the assembled crowd. "This is your future king. A man who cannot control his base instincts. Who would throw away centuries of tradition for a pretty voice and a moment of lust." Cináed turned to face her, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Lady Saoirse, you are a remarkable woman, and you deserve a mate who can love you fully. I am not that man. I have never been that man. This arrangement was made by our parents for political reasons, and we have both been trapped by it. I'm offering us both freedom." "Freedom?" Saoirse laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You're offering me shame and disgrace. Every alpha in the kingdom will know I was rejected at the altar for a nobody. My family will be humiliated. The alliance between our territories will crumble. And for what? A bond that should have been rejected the moment it formed." The high priestess raised her staff, and silence fell immediately. Her eyes, ancient and knowing, swept across the cathedral before settling on me. "Órla of no clan," she said. "Do you accept this bond? Knowing the chaos it will bring, the enemies it will make, the hardship you will face as a queen with no lineage. A rejected mate has the right to refuse when the alpha returns. The choice is yours." All eyes turned to me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. This was everything I'd dreamed of 3 years ago, but it came wrapped in complications I'd never imagined. If I said yes, I would be throwing the kingdom into political turmoil. The northern territories would view it as an insult. Other alphas would see Cináed as weak, controlled by base desire rather than logic. I would be hated by the nobility, seen as a social climber who'd seduced a prince above her station. But if I said no, if I rejected him the way he'd once rejected me, I would lose him forever. The bond would die, and this time it would take both of us with it. A bond rejected by both parties doesn't just fade. Destroys. I looked at Cináed, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years. He'd changed. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness to his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. But his eyes, those golden eyes that marked him as royalty, held nothing but desperate hope as he waited for my answer. "You hurt me," I said softly, but in the silent cathedral everyone heard. "When you rejected the bond, something inside me broke. I spent months unable to sing, unable to feel anything but pain. They had to chain me and force me to perform because I'd lost the will to do even the one thing I loved. You did that to me. And now you want me to forget it all and accept you back." He bowed his head. "No, I don't expect you to forget. What I did was unforgivable. I took the gift the goddess gave us and threw it away like garbage because I was afraid of what others would think. I prioritized everyone else's opinion over your well-being, over our bond, over my own heart. I was a coward and you suffered for it. If you reject me now, I will accept it as the justice I deserve." "But," I prompted because I could hear the unspoken word. "But I'm asking anyway," he said, looking up at me with raw vulnerability. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to spend the rest of my life making this right. I'm asking you to be my mate, my queen, my partner in all things. Not because you're obligated, not because of the bond, but because you choose it. Choose me. Despite everything I've done. Please, Órla. I'm begging you. The silence stretched between us. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching, waiting for my decision. Part of me wanted to say no, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd endured. To watch him suffer the way I had suffered. But that wasn't who I was. Revenge had never been in my nature. I thought about the past 3 years. The emptiness. The way colors had seemed duller, food had lost its taste, and music had become just noise. I'd been going through the motions of life without actually living. The bond hadn't died when he rejected me. It had just gone dormant, waiting, hoping that somehow we might find our way back to each other. If I accept, I said slowly, things will change. I won't be your secret. I won't be hidden away or treated as less than. I won't be an omega who knows her place and keeps quiet. If I'm to be your mate, I will be your equal in all things, and I will speak my mind even when you don't want to hear it. A smile broke across his face, the first real smile I'd seen from him in years. I would expect nothing less. And you will work to change the laws, I continued, my voice growing stronger. The laws that allow omegas to be owned, to be chained and forced to perform, to have no rights or autonomy. If I'm to be your queen, I will not rule over a kingdom that treats people like property. Done, he said immediately. I swear it. On my life, on my crown, on the bond between us. I will spend my reign making this kingdom better, safer, more just for everyone. Starting with you. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of my life. I could choose safety, reject him, and continue my small, controlled existence in the conservatory. Or I could choose chaos, uncertainty, and the terrifying possibility of happiness. I accept the bond, I said, and the cathedral erupted. Cináed surged forward and pulled me into his arms. The moment we touched, the bond that had been dormant for 3 years blazed to life. I could feel everything he felt. Relief, joy, love, and underneath it all, a current of guilt and determination to make things right. He buried his face in my hair and I felt his shoulders shake with sobs. Thank you, he whispered against my ear. Thank you. I swear I will never make you regret this. I swear it on everything I am. Around us chaos reigned. Saoirse had stormed out of the cathedral, her family following behind her with outraged faces. The nobility was divided, some shouting in anger, others watching with curiosity and even approval. The high priestess simply stood there with a small smile, as if this had been exactly what she'd expected. She raised her staff again, and slowly the crowd settled. It seems, she said dryly, that the goddess has other plans for this day. A bond cannot be denied, not even by royal decree. What the moon has joined, let no mortal separate. She looked at Cináed and me with those ancient knowing eyes. Though I suspect the hard part is just beginning for both of you. She wasn't wrong. The next few weeks were a storm of political maneuvering and public opinion. The northern territories were furious, threatening to break the alliance. Several noble families demanded Cináed's abdication, claiming he was unfit to rule if he couldn't control his base instincts. The common people, surprisingly, were largely on our side. The story of the prince who gave up everything for his true mate had a romantic appeal that transcended class boundaries. Cináed and I were married in a small, private ceremony 3 days later. No grand cathedral, no hundreds of nobles, just the high priestess, a few trusted advisors, and the two of us. I wore a simple dress of green silk, and Cináed wore his military uniform rather than ceremonial robes. When we spoke our vows, I felt the bond settle into place fully, completely, the way it should have 3 years ago. That night, alone in his chambers for the first time as a married couple, we talked. Really talked. He told me about the pressure he'd been under after his father's death, how everyone had expectations for what kind of king he should be, how he'd been taught that personal desires were weakness. I told him about the years in the conservatory, the abuse and control, the way I'd learned to bury my own wants and needs to survive. I'm sorry, he said for the 100th time. His fingers tracing patterns on my arm as we lay together in the darkness. I know I keep saying it, but I need you to hear it. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry for wasting 3 years we could have had together. I turned to face him, cupping his cheek with my hand. I forgive you, I said. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. But because holding on to anger will only poison what we're trying to build. We both made choices that led us here. Now we have to choose what comes next. What do you want to come next? He asked softly. Thought about it. A week ago, I'd been a slave in everything but name, my only purpose to sing when commanded. Now I was a queen, mate to the High Alpha, with more power and freedom than I'd ever imagined possible. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I want to matter, I said finally. Not just as your mate but as myself. I want to use my voice for more than entertainment. I want to help change the laws that kept me chained. I want to give other Omegas hope that they can be more than what society tells them they are. Cináed smiled. Then that's what we'll do. Together. And we did. Over the months and years that followed, we worked to transform the kingdom. The first law we changed made it illegal to own Omegas as property. The conservatory was reformed into an actual school where talented singers could study freely, without chains or abuse. We established rights for Omegas to own property, to refuse unwanted bonds, to have autonomy over their own lives and bodies. It wasn't easy. We faced opposition at every turn from those who benefited from the old system. There were assassination attempts, political coups, and times when it seemed like the kingdom might tear itself apart. But we had something the old guard didn't. We had each other, and the unshakable belief that we were building something better. Saoirse eventually married an alpha from the Eastern Territories, a love match rather than a political arrangement, and she actually thanked me years later for freeing her from a marriage that would have made them both miserable. The alliance with the Northern Territories was rocky for a while, but eventually, they came around when they saw that the changes we were making benefited everyone, not just Omegas. 5 years after that chaotic wedding day, I stood on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the capital city. Cináed came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything is," I said, leaning back into his warmth. 5 years ago, I was being dragged in chains to sing at your wedding. Now I'm standing here as your queen, having just signed legislation that will provide education for all children regardless of their designation. It doesn't feel real sometimes. "It's real," he said, turning me to face him. "You made it real. Your courage, your vision, your refusal to accept things as they were. I may be the alpha, but you're the one who changed everything." I shook my head. "We did it together." "Together," he agreed and kissed me softly. "Always together." That night, I sang for him in the privacy of our chambers, the first time I'd sung for pleasure rather than duty or performance in years. My voice had changed, deepened somehow, carrying notes of experience and pain and joy all woven together. When I finished, Cináed had tears streaming down his face. "What is it?" he asked, concerned. "I just realized," he said, "that this is the first time I've heard you sing without pain behind it. Every other time, even when you were technically perfect, I could hear the hurt underneath. But just now you sounded free." He was right. Somewhere along the journey from rejected Omega to queen, from broken to whole, I had finally healed. The scars were still there. They would always be there. But they no longer define me. Word of our story spread beyond our kingdom, carried by traveling merchants and wandering bards. It became a legend, the rejected Omega who was forced to sing at the royal wedding, only for the Alpha Groom to fall to his knees and choose her. Other kingdoms began examining their own laws regarding Omegas, and slowly, painfully, change rippled outward. Years later, young Omegas would write to me, thanking me for showing them that they could be more than society told them they could be. They sent me their stories of breaking free from abusive situations, of finding their voices, of refusing to accept the limitations others placed on them. Each letter was a reminder of why the struggle had been worth it. But perhaps the most profound change was the one inside myself. I learned that being rejected hadn't made me unworthy. I learned that my value didn't come from whether someone chose to see it. I learned that the most powerful thing I could do was choose myself every single day, regardless of whether anyone else approved. Cináed learned too. He learned that true strength wasn't about dominating others or denying your own heart. He learned that a good king admits his mistakes and works to correct them. He learned that love, real love, requires courage and humility in equal measure. On the 10th anniversary of that disastrous-turned-miraculous wedding day, we returned to the cathedral where it had all happened. The high priestess Brigid, now even more ancient but still sharp as ever, met us there. "I knew," she said without preamble. "When you were dragged in wearing those chains, when young Cináed stood at the altar pretending he could marry someone else, I knew the goddess had plans. The bond cannot be denied, and those who try always find their way back eventually." "You could have said something," Cináed said wryly. She laughed. "And rob you of the journey." "Well, you both needed to choose each other freely, not because someone told you it was destiny. The struggle made the bond stronger." She was right, of course. If Cináed had accepted the bond 3 years earlier just because it existed, without understanding what he was giving up or why it mattered, our relationship would have been built on obligation rather than choice. And if I had simply forgiven him without making him work for it, without demanding changes and equality, I would have been accepting less than I deserved. As we stood in that cathedral, Cináed took my hands. "Sing for me," he said softly. "The song you sang that day." I hesitated. That song carried so much pain, so many difficult memories. But perhaps that was exactly why I needed to sing it. To reclaim it. To transform it from a dirge into a celebration. I opened my mouth and sang. The same ancient words, the same melody, but everything was different. My voice was stronger now, more confident. And instead of singing about love that could never be, I sang about love that had survived rejection, pain, separation, and politics. Love that had been tested by fire and emerged not just intact but reinforced. When I finished, Cináed was crying again. He did that a lot these days. My fierce alpha who'd learned that tears weren't weakness but rather proof that you cared deeply enough to feel. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a second chance. For being brave enough to accept the bond even after I'd broken it. For making me a better man and a better king." "Thank you," I replied, "for finally choosing me. For falling to your knees in front of the entire kingdom. For proving that love can win, even against impossible odds." We kissed in that cathedral, 10 years after the most chaotic wedding ceremony in the kingdom's history, and it felt like coming home. Not to a place but to each other. To the life we'd built together through struggle and compromise and endless determination to be better than we'd been. As we walked out of the cathedral hand in hand, I thought about all the Omegas who were watching our story, hoping for their own happy endings. I wanted them to know that it wasn't about waiting for an alpha to save you. It was about saving yourself first, claiming your own worth, and then choosing to share your life with someone who recognized that worth and celebrated it. I wanted them to know that rejection doesn't mean you're unworthy. Sometimes it just means the timing is wrong or the other person isn't ready, or you're being protected from something that would ultimately hurt you more. And sometimes, miraculously, rejection isn't the end but rather a painful beginning that leads somewhere better than you could have imagined. Most of all, I wanted them to know that their voice matters. Whether it's literal like mine or metaphorical, every Omega has a voice that deserves to be heard. Not chains that silence them, not laws that diminish them, but genuine recognition of their inherent value as people. That night, as Cináed and I lay in bed, our fingers intertwined, I sang softly. Not a grand performance, not a ceremonial piece, just a simple lullaby my mother had sung to me before she died, one of my only memories of her. It spoke of stars and dreams and children who would grow up to change the world. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Cináed asked drowsily. 100 years from now, will anyone care about the Omega Queen and the Alpha who fell to his knees? I considered this. Maybe not us specifically, but they'll remember that change was possible, that someone fought for Omega rights and won. That a bond rejected was accepted again and led to a better kingdom. The details might fade, but the hope will remain. Good, he murmured, already half asleep. That's enough. And it was. More than enough. We hadn't set out to become legends. We'd simply been two broken people trying to find our way back to each other. And in the process, we'd accidentally helped heal a kingdom. Years continued to pass. We had children, 3 of them. Fiacre with his father's golden eyes and his mother's gift for song. Niamh, fierce and determined and destined to be a warrior. And little Tig, gentle-souled and artistic, who painted the world in colors the rest of us couldn't see. We taught them that designation didn't define them, that Alpha, Beta, and Omega were descriptions, not destinies. We watched as the kingdom continued to transform. More Omegas entered positions of power and influence. The conservatory I'd once been enslaved in produced free artists who performed because they loved music, not because they were forced. The old families who'd resisted change either adapted or faded into irrelevance. And through it all, the bond between Cináed and me remained strong. Not because it was fated or because the moon had declared it, but because we chose it. Every day we woke up and chose each other again. On good days and bad days, through political crises and personal struggles, in moments of joy and in times of grief, we chose each other. That, I think, was the real lesson. The bond hadn't saved us. We'd saved the bond by refusing to give up on it, by fighting for it even when fighting seemed pointless, by believing that love was worth the struggle. On my 50th birthday, surrounded by my family and friends, I stood to make a speech. My hair was streaked with silver now, my face lined with years of smiling and crying and living fully. Cináed sat beside me, his own golden hair fading to white, still as handsome as the day I'd first seen him but worn softer by time and love. 32 years ago, I began, my voice still clear despite the decades. I was dragged in silver chains to sing at a wedding. I was nobody, an Omega with no name, no pack, no future beyond serving others. Today I stand before you as your queen, yes, but more importantly as myself. Fully myself, without apology or diminishment. I looked around the room at all the faces watching me. Nobles and commoners, alphas and omegas and betas. All equal in this space we'd created. The journey from there to here wasn't easy. It required sacrifice and courage from so many people. But most of all, it required believing that change was possible. That the way things had always been didn't have to be the way things would always be. That one voice, raised in defiance or in song, could start a revolution. I paused, feeling Cináed's hand find mine under the table. His grip still strong and sure. So I want to thank everyone who believed when belief seemed foolish. Everyone who fought when fighting seemed pointless. Everyone who refused to accept chains, literal or metaphorical, and who dared to imagine something better. You are the real heroes of this story. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about that girl in chains, terrified and broken, forced to sing at the wedding of the alpha who'd rejected her. I wished I could go back and tell her that everything would be okay. That the pain was temporary but the strength she'd gained from surviving it would last forever. But then again, maybe she already knew. Maybe some part of her, even in the darkest moment, understood that this wasn't the end but rather a transformation. That she'd be refined by the fire into something stronger, more brilliant, more herself than she'd ever been allowed to be before. As the celebration continued around me, Cináed leaned close and whispered, "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," I said honestly. "Nothing. How lucky I am. How hard it was to get here. How grateful I am that you fell to your knees that day." He smiled, that soft, private smile he reserved only for me. "I'm grateful you let me get back up." And that truly was the heart of it. Not the grand gesture of kneeling, but the quiet grace of acceptance. Not the rejection or the reunion, but everything that came after. The daily choice to love, to fight, to build something better together. As I looked around at the kingdom we'd helped transform, at the children we'd raised to be strong and kind, at the laws we'd changed and the lives we'd touched, I realized something profound. The story wasn't about a rejected Omega forced to sing at a royal wedding. It wasn't even about the alpha groom who fell to his knees. It was about two people who found each other twice, once by fate and once by choice. And it was the second time the choice that truly mattered. That night, after all the guests had gone home and it was just the two of us again, I sang. Not for performance or duty or even celebration, but simply because I wanted to. Because my voice was mine, freely given, never again to be forced or controlled. And Cináed listened like he always did, with tears streaming down his face, like he always did, grateful beyond words for the gift of hearing me, like he always was. The moon shone through the windows, the same moon that had witnessed our first meeting and our painful separation and our miraculous reunion. The bond between us glowed softly, a golden thread that even death wouldn't sever. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because fate had decreed it, but because I had fought for it. Because we had chosen it. Because love, real love, is never about destiny. It's about choice. Every single day it's about choice. And I would choose him, choose this life, choose this love, for every day that remained to us. Not because I had to. 'Cause I wanted to. But let me take you back, because there are parts of this story I haven't told you yet. Parts that matter, parts that shaped who we became and what we built together. The years between that wedding day and our golden anniversary weren't all triumph and transformation. There was darkness too, moments when we nearly lost everything, when the bond we'd fought so hard to preserve almost shattered under the weight of what we were trying to accomplish. 3 months after our quiet wedding ceremony, the first assassination attempt came. I was in the garden, the same garden where Cináed had rejected me years before, now reclaimed as a place of healing rather than pain. I'd been working with the royal gardeners to plant night-blooming jasmine, a flower sacred to omegas, something that had never been allowed in the royal gardens before. I didn't hear the assassin approach. One moment I was kneeling in the soil, my hands dirty and my heart light, and the next there was a blade at my throat and a voice hissing in my ear. Omega filth! You don't belong here. You've poisoned the Alpha's mind, turned him against his own kind. But it ends today. The blade bit into my skin, drawing blood, and I felt the bond flare in my chest as Cináed sensed my distress. But he was in a council meeting on the other side of the palace. He would never reach me in time. I was going to die here in this garden, murdered by someone who saw my very existence as a threat to the natural order. Terror flooded through me, but underneath it something else rose. Rage. Pure, burning rage that after everything I'd survived, after claiming my freedom and my voice and my place, someone thought they could just take it all away with a knife in the dark. I opened my mouth and screamed. Not a scream of fear, but of fury, and I poured every ounce of my power into it. My voice, the gift that had been my curse and my salvation, became a weapon. The sound that emerged was primal, devastating, the cry of an Omega who refused to be a victim anymore. The assassins stumbled back, hands clapping over their ears, and in that moment of distraction I moved. Years of abuse in the conservatory had taught me to endure pain, to keep performing even when hurt, and I'd been secretly training with the royal guard for weeks, knowing that being queen would make me a target. I wasn't defenseless anymore. I swept the assassins' legs out from under them, and they crashed to the ground. The knife skittered across the stone path. Royal guards came running at the sound of my scream, and within seconds, the would-be killer was subdued. It was only then, as the adrenaline faded, that I started shaking. Cináed burst into the garden moments later, his face pale with terror, and gathered me into his arms despite the blood on my throat and the dirt on my dress. "I thought I'd lost you," he gasped against my hair. "I felt your fear through the bond and I ran, but I thought I'd be too late, I thought." "I'm okay," I said, but my voice was trembling. "I'm okay," fought back. "I'm not that helpless Omega in chains anymore." The assassin was revealed to be a beta from one of the old noble families, hired by a coalition of alphas who opposed the reforms we were implementing. It was the first attempt, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next 2 years, there were 7 more attempts on my life, 3 on Cináed's, and one horrible night when they tried to kidnap little Fiacra, who was only 4 years old at the time. That night broke something in me. I'd been trying so hard to be gracious, to win over the opposition through patience and understanding, to prove that an Omega could be a good queen. But when they threatened my child, all that restraint shattered. The next morning, I called an emergency session of the Royal Council. I stood before the assembled nobles, many of whom barely concealed their contempt for me, and I spoke with ice in my voice. Last night someone tried to take my son. My 4-year-old son who has done nothing but exist. They failed but only barely. The guard who protected him is in the infirmary with injuries that may never fully heal. This ends now. One of the Alpha counselors, Knelt of the Western Holdings, sneered at me. And what exactly do you think you can do about it, Omega? You may wear a crown but you're still. Still what? I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut. Still worthless. Still property. Still something you can dismiss and discard. Let me be very clear about something. I am the queen of this kingdom, mated to your high Alpha, and I am done being patient with those of you who seem to think that terrorizing my family will somehow restore the world you've lost. That world is gone. It's not coming back. And if you continue to fight against the future, you will be left behind. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even Cináed looked surprised by the steel in my voice. I'd always been the gentle one, the peacemaker, the one who believed everyone could be reasoned with. But that version of Órla had died the moment someone put their hands on my child. From this day forward, I continued, any attempt on the life of a royal family member will be considered an act of treason, punishable by permanent exile and seizure of all lands and titles. Any noble family found to be funding or supporting such attempts will face the same consequences. And for those of you sitting in this chamber who think I don't know about your secret meetings, your whispered plots, your hidden funding of resistance movements, let me assure you, I know everything. It was a bluff partially. We knew some of what was happening but not all. But the way several faces paled told me the bluff had landed. You have a choice, I said, softer now but no less firm. You can accept the changes happening in this kingdom and find your place in the new order. Many of you have skills and wisdom that would be valuable if you chose to use them constructively. Or you can continue to fight and lose everything. The decision is yours, but make it quickly. My patience is exhausted. The room was silent after I finished speaking. Then, slowly, deliberately, Cináed stood and came to stand beside me. He took my hand in his and faced the council with me. The Queen has spoken, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. And I stand with her in all things. Those who cannot accept Órla as your queen, who cannot accept the reforms we have implemented, who cannot envision a kingdom where all designations are valued equally, you are free to leave. Renounce your titles and depart. But if you stay, you will bend the knee and you will accept the new laws. There is no middle ground anymore. It was a risk. We could have lost half the nobility that day. But instead something shifted. One by one, the nobles who had been secretly fighting us stood and left the chamber. Not all of them, but enough. The ones who remained, including some we'd thought were enemies, Knelt. Knelt of the Western Holdings was among those who stayed. He approached me after the session ended, his face troubled. My queen, he said stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the title. I owe you an apology. I have been resistant to change, set in my ways. But you're right. The attempt on your son was unconscionable. I may not agree with all of your reforms, but I will not be party to violence against children. You have my loyalty, for what it's worth. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Over the following weeks, others came forward similarly. They didn't all become supporters overnight, but they stopped actively working against us. The assassination attempts ceased. The kingdom began to stabilize. But the cost had been high. I'd had to become harder, more ruthless, less willing to give endless chances to those who wanted to harm us. Cináed sometimes looked at me with concern, worried that I was losing the softness that had drawn him to me in the first place. I'm not losing myself, I told him one night as we lay in bed, both of us unable to sleep after another long day of political maneuvering. I'm just evolving. The Órla who sang in chains at your wedding was a girl who'd been beaten down her entire life. The Órla who became your queen was learning to stand up. This Órla, the one who threatened the council and meant every word, she's the one who understands that kindness without boundaries is just weakness. I can still be compassionate, but I won't be a victim ever again. He pulled me closer, his hand resting protectively over my heart. I know. And I'm in awe of you every single day. I just worry that the throne is taking something from you that you'll never get back. It is, I admitted. But it's also giving me something I never had before. Power. Real power to make change, to protect people, to ensure that no other Omega goes through what I went through. That's worth the cost. The years that followed proved me right. With the active resistance quelled, we were able to implement deeper reforms. We established the first school specifically for Omegas, teaching them not just domestic skills but politics, law, medicine, and warfare. We created a legal framework where Omegas could file grievances against Alphas who abused them, with actual consequences for the abusers. We instituted a quota system requiring that all government bodies include proportional representation of Omegas and Betas, not just Alphas. Each change was fought over, negotiated, sometimes watered down from our original vision. But progress, even slow progress, was still progress. And we could see it working. Young Omegas who a generation ago would have been servants or property were now becoming lawyers, physicians, military officers, scholars. The world was changing and we were the catalyst. But there were personal costs too. My relationship with the artistic community became strained. Many of the musicians and singers I'd known from my conservatory days felt I'd abandoned them, that I'd become just another politician more concerned with power than art. It hurt because music had been my first love, the thing that had sustained me through the darkest times. I tried to bridge that gap by continuing to perform, at least occasionally. Once a month, I would hold a concert in the palace gardens, open to anyone who wanted to attend. I'd sing the old songs, the ones that had gotten me through the years of abuse, and I'd include new compositions from young artists trying to make their way in the world. But it wasn't the same. I was performing as a queen now, not as a fellow struggling artist. There was a distance, a formality, that no amount of casual dress or open invitation could overcome. I missed the days when music was just about the joy of sound, before it became tangled up in politics and symbolism. Cináed noticed my melancholy after one such concert. "You miss it," he said simply. "The simplicity of just being a singer." "Sometimes," I admitted. "Is that terrible? I have everything I ever dreamed of and more. I'm helping people, making real change. But sometimes I miss the girl who just wanted to sing because it made her feel less alone." "It's not terrible," he said gently. "It's human. Or Omega. Or whatever we're calling it these days." He smiled at his own weak joke. "You know what I miss? I miss the days when I could walk through the city without a security detail. When I could just be Cináed, not the high alpha. But we gave up those simple pleasures for something bigger. That doesn't mean we can't mourn what we lost." He was right, of course. And in the morning, I found a new depth to my music. My voice carried not just technical perfection now, but the weight of lived experience. When I sang of loss, audiences heard the truth of it. When I sang of hope, they felt the struggle behind it. I might not be the carefree girl singing in a chapel anymore, but I was something more complex, more real. Our children grew up in this complicated world we'd created. Fiacre, our eldest, had his father's political mind and his mother's gift for reading people. He would spend hours in council meetings, just observing, learning the intricacies of governance. By the time he was 16, he was already helping negotiate trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms. Niamh, our middle child and only daughter, was pure fire. She joined the royal guard at 15 and rose through the ranks on merit alone, refusing any special treatment because of her birth. She became a champion of Omega rights in the military, pushing for integration and equal standards. Some of the old guard grumbled, but they couldn't deny that she was one of the best warriors the kingdom had ever produced. And Tig, our youngest, was the artist I'd never been allowed to be. He painted, sculpted, wrote poetry and composed music. He was gentle where Niamh was fierce, contemplative where Fiachra was active. And he was utterly himself, never trying to fit into anyone's expectations of what a prince should be. Watching them grow, seeing them become themselves without the constraints that had bound Cináed and me, was perhaps our greatest achievement. They would inherit a better world than we had, and they would continue building on what we'd started. But parenthood also brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. When Fiachra presented as an alpha at 14, I had to confront my own biases. Despite everything I'd fought for, part of me tensed when he displayed dominant behaviors, when he instinctively tried to lead and control situations. I had to remind myself that being an alpha didn't make him like the alphas who'd abused me. He was his own person, raised with different values, taught that strength included gentleness and power included restraint. When Niamh presented as a beta, she struggled with feeling like she'd disappointed us somehow, like being beta made her less special than her alpha brother or her omega father. We had to help her understand that designation was just one small part of who she was, that her worth came from her character and her choices, not from an accident of biology. And when Tig presented as an omega, he faced harassment from some of the old noble families who saw him as proof that the royal line was being weakened. Cináed and I were furious, ready to rain down consequences on anyone who dared insult our son. But Tig, wise beyond his years, asked us to let him handle it himself. He did so by creating a series of paintings depicting famous omegas throughout history who'd changed the world through art, science and courage. The exhibit became the most talked-about cultural event of the season, and suddenly, being an omega prince was something to celebrate rather than apologize for. I'd never been more proud. As our children matured and began taking on responsibilities of their own, Cináed and I found ourselves with more time together. We took trips to parts of the kingdom we'd never visited, meeting people, hearing their stories, understanding how our reforms were actually affecting lives at the ground level. One such trip took us to a small village on the western coast where a community of omegas had established a collective farm. They'd pooled their resources, bought land, and were proving that omegas could be just as successful at running businesses as anyone else. The leader of the collective was a woman named Aisling, who'd been one of the first students at the omega school we'd established. She showed us around the property with obvious pride, pointing out their irrigation system, their crop rotation plan, their communal living spaces. 10 years ago, my queen, she said, I was property. My alpha owner worked me in his fields from dawn to dusk, fed me scraps, beat me when I complained. When the new laws passed and I was freed, I had nothing. No skills except farm work, no money, nowhere to go. She paused at the edge of a field of wheat, golden in the afternoon sun. But then I heard about the school. I was 26 years old, probably too old to start learning, but I went anyway. They taught me to read, to do mathematics, to understand business and law. They gave me the tools to imagine a different life. And now look. She gestured at the thriving farm around us. 32 omegas live and work here. We're profitable, or happy, or free. You did this. You and the Alpha King. You gave us our lives back. I had to turn away to hide my tears. This was why we'd fought so hard. Not for abstract principles or political theory, but for real people like Aisling who deserved the chance to determine their own destinies. That night, Cináed and I lay in the simple guest room Aisling had offered us, listening to the sound of the ocean through the open window. Days like today, he said softly. I remember why it was all worth it. The assassination attempts, the political battles, the endless compromises. We changed that woman's life. We changed 32 lives, just in this one village. Multiply that across the kingdom. Thousands of lives, I finished. Maybe tens of thousands. And it will ripple forward through generations. Aisling will have children who grow up free, who'll never know what it's like to be property. They'll take this freedom for granted, the way it should be taken for granted. Do you think we'll be remembered? He asked, not for the first time. It was a question that haunted him as he grew older, the need to know that our struggle had mattered beyond our own lifetimes. I think will be a footnote in history books, I said honestly. The queen who was an omega, the king who changed the laws. But the people who really matter, people like Aisling, they'll remember. They'll tell their children and their children's children about the time when things changed. When someone finally said that all people deserve dignity and freedom. The details might get fuzzy, but the spirit of it will endure. He was quiet for a long moment. That's enough, he finally said. That's more than enough. Years continued their relentless march forward. We grew older, our hair silvering, our bodies moving a bit slower. The fire that had driven us in those early years banked to steady coals, still warm, still vital, but not the consuming blaze it had once been. Cináed developed problems with his lungs, a consequence of the smoke from that burning building he'd run into to save a family when he was younger, before he'd become king. There were nights when I'd wake to the sound of his coughing, harsh and painful, and I'd hold him until it passed, powerless to do anything but be there. I developed arthritis in my hands, the joints swelling and aching, making it hard to do delicate work. The royal physicians said it was common in omegas who'd been kept in silver chains for extended periods. The damage had been done decades ago, but it was only now manifesting. Some nights my hands hurt so badly I couldn't sleep, and Cináed would massage them gently. His touch still so careful and loving after all these years. We were breaking down, both of us, our bodies paying the price for lives lived hard and fully. But we faced it together, just as we'd faced everything else. When Cináed's father's old advisor, Eamon, lay dying, he requested an audience with me. I went to his bedside, curious what the old beta who'd never approved of me could possibly want to say at the end of his life. I was wrong about you, he said without preamble. His voice weak but clear. When Cináed chose you over duty, I thought he was throwing away the kingdom for lust. I fought against you in council, blocked your reforms whenever I could, made your life difficult because I truly believed you would be the ruin of us all. He paused to catch his breath, and I waited, unsure where this was going. But I lived to see the kingdom not just survive but thrive under your partnership. I've watched omegas become full citizens, seen families prosper under the new laws, witnessed a level of peace and prosperity I never imagined possible. You were right, my queen. I was wrong. And I wanted to tell you that before I die, to apologize for the years I wasted fighting against the future. I took his withered hand in mine. You fought for what you believed was right, I said gently. Even if I disagreed with you, I respected that you had principles and stood by them. And when you realized you were wrong, you had the courage to change. That's more than many people ever manage. He smiled, tears leaking from his clouded eyes. The king is lucky to have you. The kingdom is lucky to have you. I only wish I'd realized it sooner. He died 2 days later, and at his funeral I sang. I sang the traditional mourning songs, my voice carrying the weight of complicated history, of enemies who'd become if not friends then at least people who understood each other. After the ceremony, several other nobles who'd opposed me in the early days approached me, echoing Eamon's sentiments. It was a strange sort of vindication, being proven right by those